So let's just get into everything. I realize we haven't even introduced ourselves. My name is Laura. I'm the CTO at DX. We're a developer insights company. I'm joined here by Nathen from Google, who works on Dora. A lot of ways I view him as like, when I have a question about Dora metrics or some of the research, like he's the first person that I think to ask. And he's always so gracious with his time and is just a fountain of knowledge, good, bad, and the ugly. So really, really wonderful to have you here, Nathen. And thanks for putting on your best shirt, I assume, to join us for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It is my best and favorite shirt. It's covered with avocados. It might be hard to see, but if you zoom in, you'll see that. And yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really love I love talking about all things Dora, and specifically about all things. How do we help teams, specifically technology-driven teams, get better at getting better? That I think is the journey that we're all on, whether it's the developer experience, Dora metrics. These things are not unrelated. They all go together and really just help teams out. And it's been really great getting to know you over the past few months through various Zoom calls and otherwise. And again, like you said, just chatting about all of this stuff. And we said, well, maybe others should be able to listen as well. So let's do that.
Yeah. Our hope when Nathen and I were sort of talking about doing this was like, let's open up one of our normal conversations to the world and have you all join us. And there's actually a nice spicy question that I want to start off with, which is Dora metrics. Like, are they still useful? Are the 4 key metrics still useful? Are they still relevant after Accelerate has been published many years ago? What is your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thanks for that. And I would say that the research has continued. The book Accelerate was published back in like 2018 or 2019. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that research program has continued. Google, as you probably know, acquired the company that was called Dora back in late 2018. We've continued the research, and the important things are still true. The research is sort of academically based. We put a lot of rigor behind how we do the research. The research itself is program and platform agnostic, and it really is about how do we help teams get better at delivering and operating software. So to the question, are the 4 metrics still valuable? I think absolutely they are. Our research continues to show a couple of things about them. Those 4 metrics tend to drive organizational performance, or they're predictive of organizational performance. So the better you are at delivering software, likely you're going to have better organizational performance. In the later years, we have found another sort of factor that goes into that, though, and that's sort of operational performance, or think about this in terms of the reliability of the services that you're running. We find that as software delivery performance improves and the reliability of your applications, or the operational performance improves, they both really come together to drive that strong organizational focus. In fact, we see some signs that if you're really good at delivering software and really bad at running it, that's not actually going to help your organization. You kind of need both.
Yeah, I think that is, it's so helpful to contextualize what this research is for, who it's for, when it works, when it doesn't. One of the biggest complaints I get about Dora metrics, quite honestly, is people like to complain to me about a lot of things. I'm here to help them, so I always welcome it. But it's like, we have been elite, and like Dora metrics just aren't useful for us anymore. And we talked about this, and it's like, well, Dora metrics are designed for people and organizations where delivery is your bottleneck. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what is the case when delivery is not your bottleneck anymore?
Yeah, for sure. So when we look at those delivery metrics, there's a couple of things about them also. First, 2 of those metrics are about throughput and 2 are about stability. Throughput and stability of change within your software delivery system. And for the longest time as an industry, we kind of approach these 2 as trade-offs of one another. Either you can move fast or your changes can be stable. What we've done is, through the research, has been able to refute that. The truth is that what we see are teams that are delivering fast also have high stability. In fact, our top performing teams every year in our research perform well across all 4. And the lower performing teams tend to perform poorly across all 4 of those metrics, both the throughput metrics and the stability metrics. So as Dave Farley likes to say, and I'm going to misquote him a little bit here, but if you go read his book, Modern Software Engineering, you'll find it. Over the long term, you basically have 2 choices. You can have better software faster, or slower software, or worse software slower. Your choice. better or worse, faster or slower. You probably want better and faster.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think that that's really important. And I do think, however, it is important to really get back to sort of the heart of Dora's philosophy, and that is one of continuous improvement. The way that you best leverage those Dora metrics is to understand how are you doing today, figure out, is that good enough? You probably want to improve. So what's holding you back? Now, if you
Hmm.
take and go and work on that thing that's holding you back, and this is where the research goes beyond those four metrics into a bunch of different capabilities. But if you take that idea, figure out what's holding you back, improve that thing, and step back and look at a bigger level within your organization, software delivery might very well be the bottleneck in your organization. We've got plenty of innovation happening over here. We just can't get that innovation out the door and available to our customers. That's a good sign that software delivery is a problem. But on the other hand, if you're able to ship software on demand all the time, things are working really well, software delivery may not be your organizational bottleneck. The thing that might be
Hmm.
slowing you down could be product market fit, could be the way that you're marketing, the way that you're selling, who knows? But Dora's philosophy would say, well, go look at that thing that is holding you back and figure out how can you measure and improve that thing.
Hmm. I think that last piece is so important. It's about measure and improve. And I think I was reflecting on this. I think someone posted something about, oh, it was Rebecca Murphy from Swarmia, who's a friend of mine. We know each other from 10 years ago. We spoke at a conference together in
Nice.
Salzburg, of all places. Um, and she was talking about how, like, have benchmarks sort of ruined the industry in some ways
Mm,
because we have people chasing ideals that are put out there from companies that are in no way next to or no way, they just don't have a use case that's even similar. And I said, yeah, it's sort of like if you I like I exercise, right? Because like I'm getting old and I have to. But my trainer's like a professional athlete. Like I can't even do a pull-up. So
right.
it would be really unrealistic if I was like, well, my goal is to do 10 pull-ups when I'm like really struggling. And I think it's a lot of like there's a lot of copy and paste culture. And I think if there's one thing I was reflecting is like, was this Dora's fault? I don't really think it was, but I think there's like a set it and forget it mentality a lot with Dora metrics of like, I'm going to measure once and benchmark, and then that's it.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. That can absolutely be a challenge. And I think to like pull the thread a little bit more on the exercise analogy, one of the things that I've been doing a lot of lately is riding a Peloton and in biking and maybe elsewhere, but like all I do is ride a Peloton. So I don't know what other exercise regimens there are out there.
Yeah.
But on the Peloton, there's this thing called power zone training, where basically you set a baseline and it tells you like, here's how you perform at your max. Now, for every class that you go to that's a power zone class, we're going to call out which zone you should be in, like zone 1 through 5, and you should spend this amount of time in that zone. Now, it doesn't matter if I'm a way worse cycler than you are. We both have
Hmm.
zone 1, we both have zone 2, we both have zone 3, and like we exercise in those zones. And that truly makes that class and the instructor's instructions kind of universal, regardless
Hmm.
of where you are. These classes meet you where you are. And this is a
Yeah.
thing that you can do with Dora metrics. But unfortunately, I think I have to admit something here, Lauren, I think that
Uh-oh.
maybe maybe we did cause some of these problems ourselves.
Hmm.
Maybe they're kind of foot guns, if you will.
Do you think
And
it's like the classification of the clusters that
yes,
really sort of,
yes.
because I think it's like you're in this bucket or you're in this bucket, and it's not focusing on like, oh, you can get 10, if you can you get 10% better?
Hmm,
Can you do one more pull up? Can you
right.
go like 10 more minutes in zone three? Um, and that's like, my philosophy. And I worked in developer tools for, a very long time. I obviously don't have the same depth and breadth of experience with Dora metrics as you do, obviously. But I think measure for change is really my mantra. Like I'll rent an airplane and put it in skywriting, which is, you
Yes.
know, can you go from 20% time loss per week to 18%? Like, I don't care if there's a company out there that only has 10% time loss per week. Like, for you, that 2% is everything. And I think, like, for some of these organizations, if you're deploying once a year or like twice a year because of your delivery model, and you change it so that maybe now it's once a quarter or once a month, like, that is sure, it's not on demand all the time, continuous delivery, but like, that is a pretty pretty impactful change for your business.
That is absolutely worth celebrating. No doubt. No doubt.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the levels and sort of the cluster. So if there are listeners that aren't really aware, I'll just describe those really quickly. So each year, the way that Dora collects data is we go out and we run a survey. That survey is coming soon. Watch dora.dev/survey. It will be launching soon and you'll be able to take it. But we collect all of this data, ask a bunch of questions in our survey, and then we take the answers for those 4 key metrics and we kind of throw them down on a plot. And these clusters emerge where there are teams that are very similar to one another and distinct from the other teams that emerge in that cluster. And then we have to put a label on those teams. And historically, what we've called them is low performers, medium performers, high performers. And then from time to time, we see elite performers that are even better than those high performers. The challenge here is that we really do that clustering to kind of get a pulse of the a sort of a cross section of every industry of technology driven teams, because the research is it goes across every industry, right? Retail banking, commercial banking, medical, health, governments, insurance, technology companies, you name it. They're all participating in the survey. And so as we lay out those different levels, low, medium, high, and elite, I think honestly, we do it for a couple of reasons. One, to get that pulse on here's where the industry is today. And in fact, if you look over the years, the definitions are always changing. What does it mean to be low versus what does it mean to be medium? Depends on the data we collect that year. 2, we do this to show that it doesn't matter which industry you're in. We see elite performers in highly regulated industries, and we see low performers in highly regulated industries. And the same is true across basically every industry that we look at. And so really, in showing this, we want to kind of show you the evidence that it doesn't matter where you are, your peers are achieving these levels of performance. And hopefully that inspires you to want to invest in doing better. But that's all it should do. You should never use it as a reason to say, like, I don't know. Unfortunately, I've been at an organization where a leader came out and said, by the end of the year, 80% of these teams have to be elite performers. That's a really bad directive. That's the kind of directive that leads to gaming the system, that leads to not measuring for change, but changing maybe how you measure to hit the goal. And that becomes really problematic.
Yeah, this is actually, I have had quite a few of these conversations, but it's very often that like there's not a point we necessarily disagree on, but just like a different approach. And Nathan and I were talking about this, and I said, oh, I've definitely made that recommendation before. Like I teach a course on measuring development team performance, and in my slides, and actually it's still there, I say like as a general rule, aiming for like elite is like, I think generally an okay recommendation that I would make. Of course, there's a lot of caveats, but if I had to like paint a broad brush, I would say like, sure, like that is you're not going to be worse off necessarily by doing that. I think what you're saying is like when we're trying to take individual teams from an organization and compare them to each other, or make like a broad sweeping directive, that's when we start to get those negative behaviors of like, well, I'm going to game the system. I'm going to do XYZ, XYZ. Is that kind of what you see as well out in the wild?
Yeah, I do see that. And what I encourage folks to do is encourage elite improvement. Right? Encourage that improvement. And so now if you're actually one of the worst performers within your organization, you have the most room to improve. And so you can probably improve more than the team that's really elite. And that's what we should celebrate, right? So we want to kind of look at that second order. How are you improving and how much are you improving?
Yeah. So let's go back to just that moment of cringe, authentic cringe, which is using Dora metrics to benchmark teams against one another within your organization and then making whatever decision based on that. Like, good. Are we here for it? Are we not here for it?
No, we are not.
On that, Nathan.
I mean, we can be here for it as long as what you're benchmarking and comparing yourself to another team in your organization. Yes, of course. And it should be your team 6 months ago and 6 months from now. Like, so it's not actually another
mic drop, Nathan. There's the truth.
Just at another time, right? Yes, that is the truth. Because look, with every and this is another thing about those measures. So first, when we ask the questions, every one of those questions starts with for the application or service that you primarily work on. So these are not org level metrics. These are at the level of an application or service. And then
Hmm.
once you start thinking about that, go into a bank is a classic example. Every application or service is going to have a very different context. Bank's been around for 150 years. You can virtually guarantee a lot of its important data and processing happens on a mainframe, but you can also virtually guarantee that its retail customers have a mobile banking app on their phone in their pocket. The
Hmm.
context of those two applications is very, very different. Trying to compare them to one another, it's nonsensical.
Yeah. I want to just adjacent to this is another wrong turn, bad use case, actually like actively harmful thing that I see, which is some leaders choosing to use Dora metrics to evaluate individual performance of developers. Like, how often are you deploying? For example, how many bugs did you deploy? Trying to trace down who's responsible for this change failure, or whatever. I think we can agree in a, I hope this audience as well, who's here with us, it probably doesn't need a lot of discussion, but that is an anti-pattern. That is not at all what the Dora metrics were designed to do.
Yeah, no, there were some questions clearly that are measuring the individual level. Like in our survey, we'll have a statement that you can strongly disagree to strongly agree on, something like, I feel burnt out from my work. That's not a team measure. That's an
Hmm.
individual measure, right? Whether or not you feel burnt out matters. But those four DORA metrics, the software delivery metrics in particular, those are
Yeah,
at I sometimes say at a team level, but even team I throw into those air quotes or square
like
quotes
at the
because
service level, right?
yes, it is at the service level, which means it's probably across multiple teams, but measured
Hmm.
at that service level. And the
Yeah.
truth is, look, building, delivering, operating software, unless you are a very, very, very small shop with a small number of users, you can't do that alone. It is a team sport. It
Yeah.
takes a team in order to do that.
Yeah. One interesting thing that came out of the conversation I had with Max and Grant, from LinkedIn was we talked about this like gaming the system kind of thing.
Hmm?
And they were like, we hear there's a lot of fear around, okay, well, then the developers are just going to write a script to push to get, like garbage commits or whatever to increase their commit count or like, whatever it is. And I think it was Grant that said something that I find holds true, which is like if someone is deliberately gaming the system, it is such an outlier that it is so obvious that they're doing it. And I wondered in you work with all these different organizations, helping them understand, implement, improve with Dora metrics. Have you actually ever come across in the wild like a real example of a team that was obviously trying to game the system? Like, what did that look like? What was the organizational context around it, and like what happened next?
Sure. I haven't necessarily run into any team that's actively trying to game the metrics. I have often run into conversations that sort of expose a little bit of fear and mistrust within an organization because
Mm,
they start talking about, well, here's how, like from a leadership perspective, maybe here's how my teams might game these metrics, or from a practitioner perspective, here's how my leaders might misuse these metrics in a harmful way against us. And so
mm,
I find that those conversations happen a lot more frequently than there's actual ill intent or actual using these metrics in a harmful way. But I think it is really important to surface that distrust or that lack of trust, that fear. Because one of the most important things that we know through our research is the culture of your organization is one of the most important factors that determines how well you're going to be able to deliver and operate software. And
mhm.
so if everyone in your organization is worried about fear and is thinking about how can I use these metrics against someone, that's not going to work out super well.
Yeah. I think there's on the spectrum of like spying to helping.
Mhm.
It's really like, team involvement, getting team buy-in, helping them understand like what are these metrics for? How are they being collected? Who's going to be seeing them? What decisions are they going to make when they see them? How is this going to impact my job? What am I going to be expected to do differently now that we have these metrics? These are all questions that should be like discussed out in the open in the context of your organization. And I think every leader is pressed for time. And I think
Yes.
that's one of the reasons that Dora metrics are so attractive to also to executives that don't understand software development as well as they should before implementing something like Dora metrics is just because they are so simple, they are accessible, it's standardized. But I think because there is a very gentle on-ramp to using them, that organizations do skip a lot of that very fundamental, important work of like, what the heck are we doing with these metrics anyway? And without that piece, everything just sort of, it's like it's either going this way, it's gonna zig or zag, but it's like it's not gonna go in the right direction.
Absolutely. Those metrics are there to help you, like many metrics, they're there to help you have a conversation and to
Yeah.
really drive that conversation. And if what you're doing is putting them on a dashboard and then walking away, you're not driving a conversation. That's not interesting and it's probably not helpful.
I'm so glad you mentioned conversations. Nathan, can you tell me about the conversation tool that now
Oh,
exists in the world?
yes, yes. If you have a moment and you're listening, or if you're watching the recording, head over to conversations.dora.dev. This is a fun little tool that we've put together. We recognize in all of our work with teams that it's really the conversations that matter. So we've put together this that, I don't know, maybe you'll use it in a retrospective. Maybe when you're
Hmm.
trying to figure out how to get this webinar live streaming, you can put it up on the screen to give your audience members something to just ponder while they wait. Whatever that looks like, I think we've pulled together a series of just open-ended, hopefully thought-provoking questions that can really help drive those conversations. And of course, it's open source. We'd love to have you committing or sharing your questions, the questions that you're pondering with your team, so that we can get those added into the mix as well.
Hmm. Yeah, wonderful. I sent this to Avi, the CEO, co-founder of DX, and he was like, "I just see a big question," and I was like, "Yes, isn't it
Yes.
cool?" I was like, I think it's a really useful tool as someone who's like, in my past life been responsible for facilitating retros and like bringing in
Yes.
metrics. And I think really some unsolicited management advice from me, which is like the if you're not talking about your metrics every single time your team gets together, expect that no one cares about them. And
Mm.
that sounds a little annoying, probably, to think about the amount of work that it takes to be so consistent with messaging. But when you come to a point where you are sick of hearing yourself talk about something, that is probably just about the point that your team around you, the others that you work with, are just remembering that, hey, this is a thing. And so I think bringing in ways to bring those metrics into conversations like retros, into all hands, talk about them, make them part of your team's like standard operating model. They should
Yes.
just be penetrating everything. They should be something that you talk about all the time. That's really the way to make them as useful as possible, because otherwise it's just a set it and forget it. Like, we benchmark, we took an assessment. Oh, I took my quiz and I'm this, and then now I forget about it and I don't actually keep an eye on it. And that's not helpful. That's not going to drive the change that you want to see.
Yeah, and I think that really drives home the point also of this question that comes up a lot. Who are these metrics for? Are they
Hmm.
are they for the leaders of the organization? Are they for the teams that are doing the work, like the people on the
Yeah.
ground doing the work? The answer, of course, is yes, but you have to have both, really, is the
Yeah.
real answer, right? If as a team we aren't looking at these during our retrospective or talking about what caused our lead time for changes to increase over the last period,
Hmm.
if we aren't discussing that, then they don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, I want to touch on just like that first question actually that came up about like Dora metrics for mobile teams.
Yeah.
I've had so many conversations with leaders who are like, hey, the Dora metrics just like don't work for me. What am I doing wrong? Um, I think this is another great like category of situations of like when not to use Dora metrics. So what teams, specifically thinking about all the research that goes into them, like what teams are represented in this data?
Yeah, so we do have teams of basically every shape and size. I mentioned earlier that it's organizations that are participating in every industry. We also have teams that are building various types of applications that get deployed to a data center, like a physical data center, into containers and onto, maybe something like Kubernetes in the cloud, into VMs in the cloud, into mobile applications, and so forth.
Hmm.
And really, I think that this question comes up a lot And unfortunately, I think where this question circles around is like those four measures, right? What does a deployment mean? I'm not in control of the deployment. I have to ship it off to the app store and it has to go through approval process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
Mm-hmm.
this is where contextualizing those metrics for your team starts to get really important. Maybe a
Mm-hmm.
deploy to production is when you've shipped it off to the app store. And a change failure maybe is when the app store kicks it back and says, nope, this isn't good. You have to do something else about this. You've got to fix that right now.
Mm-hmm.
You want to do something like that. Um, Oftentimes, we talk with teams who are deploying into air-gapped environments, right? Maybe they're in high security environments. And once I've shipped it this far, I have no more control over it. I can't do anything else with it. For that team, I would say maybe that's the end of your line. You want to have
Mm-hmm.
an idea about what happens, because also, as an example, in 2023, we investigated like how do people get feedback from their users, and are you really focused on your users? In the case of that air-gapped environment where I get it so far and then someone else takes it over, like that someone else, they're one of your users. Are you hearing from them? Are you getting good feedback from them and incorporating that into how you ship things? So I
Yeah.
think the short answer is yes, of course you can use Dora metrics with mobile applications. You're probably going to define when it comes to things like change lead time, the start of your timer and the end of your timer might be different than they are
Mm-hmm.
for your retail website.
And is
That's
that
okay.
like canonically, and I'm not asking you to give like the official, like this is not going to be written on a gold tablet anywhere, but like,
Sure.
is that okay that different teams start their timer and end the timer at different time teams do it at different times, but also then the benchmark is still effective? Like,
Yeah.
does that still work?
Yeah, I think it's necessary that each team kind of define their own context. I think that necessity also sort of pulls back the covers on a potential challenge that we see happening a lot, wherein organizations try to roll up their Dora metrics into a set of four metrics across 50, 100, 1,000 teams. How do we just get
Yeah.
those down to four for my entire organization? And
Yeah.
this is where you start to lose a bunch of fidelity and you start making really, decisions that are just going to dilute the information so much that it's probably not meaningful. And most important, it's probably no longer actionable. And so if you
Yeah.
can't do anything with that number, yeah,
Yeah. I think that's another great call out of like how not to use Dora metrics, which is like don't expect there to be one classification or like one cluster that you fall into as an organization. Dora metrics work on the application or the
service.
team
Yeah.
level. And I've seen a lot of companies invest so much time orchestrating every workflow tool, all their Jenkins pipelines, trying to figure out my organization, which cluster are we in? Are we elite? And that's just the wrong question to ask because, as Nathan said, you are losing so much fidelity. And it's like, it's just not designed to work like that. Um, it's an application level measure. And so if you are in an organization and you are like, oh crap, don't call me out like that. I would really encourage you to like take a deeper look at what are you using that metric for? Where is it coming from? What decisions are being made about it? Because it's actually not like that's not how it should be collected. Um,
Yeah.
and I want to ask another question about this, which is maybe something that not everyone realizes about Dora metrics is that they are not collected through APIs and workflows and data from tools. It is collected via a survey, which is going to be coming out really soon. Um, and Abby and I actually had a conversation about like measuring change failure rate automatically is really hard because there's no one way to do it. Like even like someone in the comments who just asked this question, what if we're not, Mark, if you're not doing, like you're doing continuous delivery, but not continuous deployment or the other way around, or only doing continuous integration, um, like all the timers are different. And so there's not like one, I can't just like press a button and integrate into Jenkins to be like like count my change failure rate or integrate it into PagerDuty because Also, organizations' tolerance for what is a failure? I get
Yes.
that question every single time I run my course. What's a failure?
Mhm.
Is it a bug or is it like a pager, like an incident?
Mhm.
Um, Surveying is actually the like it's so dependent that surveying is the way that Dora collects its metrics. Um, but is it still fine? Like, is it still fine to use Dora metrics when the data collection method is different from how it's collected actually for the research? I
Yeah, yeah. All
assume
right.
like
All
we've
right.
agreed as an industry, yes, it's fine.
That's okay. Yes, I think there's a lot to unpack there. So first, yes, absolutely. I always argue that the best way to start with Dora metrics is in your next retro and a post-it. Like that's it. That's
Hmm.
all you need is a post-it, and put it up on the board. And then in your next retro, come back and see how has that changed and what's caused that change or what's preventing it from improving. So that's one piece. I think that um, it is completely appropriate for different teams to define how they're capturing those metrics and what those metrics actually mean. When do timers
Hmm.
start and when do they stop? What is an actual change fail rate? But they have to write that down and publish
Hmm.
it somewhere where they and their peers can hold themselves accountable to it. And probably in writing it down, they're also writing down a date at which they will revisit this decision, right?
Hmm.
It's not going to be static forever and for always. And it absolutely will change over time.
Hmm.
And then I think to Mark's question there about we're doing continuous delivery but not continuous deployment. How can the Dora metrics be applied? I think the same thing. You decide where you want to call a deployment, and there's probably steps that happen afterwards before that actually gets to your users. I would say just be aware of those because you might end
Hmm.
up in a situation where you're doing a bunch of continuous delivery, and now there are so many things that have been delivered but not yet deployed that we're
Hmm.
afraid as an organization to release those. We've built up a bunch of deployment debt, and maybe that will freeze us in our tracks. And unless
Hmm.
we slow down on the deliveries and get these deployments out the door, we might run into some real pain there.
Yeah. I
Laura,
really,
I
yeah, go
saw
ahead.
another thing here in the chat. There were a couple of questions about leading and lagging indicators, and where do the Dora
Mhm.
metrics fit? Are they leading indicators or are they lagging indicators? My take on that is yes, they are leading and they are lagging indicators. They are leading indicators in that they are predictive of better organizational performance and, at least as importantly, better well-being for the people on your team. And then they are lagging because they're measuring what are the outcomes of your software delivery process. So some of
Hmm.
the leading metrics that go into those are the capabilities that we research. If you go over to dora.dev/research, you'll see our core model, which in the middle has those software delivery metrics. On the left-hand side has the capabilities that we investigate each year that we can say are predictive of better software delivery performance. Those models or those capabilities include technical capabilities like
Hmm.
continuous integration, but also process, like what's your change approval process look like? That has a
Hmm.
big impact on your software delivery process. And then probably most importantly, the culture. How are the people in your teams interacting with one another?
Hmm. Yeah. I think for those of you, I know there's quite a few of you in the audience that are pretty new to Dora metrics. I would encourage you to read through the State of DevOps report. Just like give it, it's a nice, it's not like a bed, I wouldn't call it a bedtime read, but it's like a nice thing to read, like get a cup of coffee or a tea or whatever, and like read it in the morning when you have like the extra brain capacity. There's so metrics and the way that Dora conducts its research is like it's so comprehensive and there's just so much to understand there and helps you contextualize those four metrics. Because usually when people talk about Dora metrics, we're just talking about like the four keys that are there, but there's actually so much. And culture is a huge, huge part of the research that goes into every State of DevOps report, which I think doesn't get adequately reflected in like the four metrics because it's kind of like if you ask a fish where water is and they're like, what are you talking about? Like it's just so ingrained in it. And I think the reports actually call out the cultural aspects of it a lot more. But that would be for those of you who are kind of brand new to the whole wide world of metrics, like something I would really recommend is to read not just about the 4 key metrics, but read about all the cultural implications and everything in one of the state of DevOps reports.
Absolutely. And you know, when we say, look, we gather our data through surveys, we aren't at the same time saying you should never integrate your systems together and build beautiful dashboards. What I am
Totally.
saying though is be careful how you go about that. There are vendors out there that have a bunch of pre-built integrations that might work really well for you. It might mean that you get tied into some of their definitions. It might mean that there's some flexibility and you can address that at a team level. The
Hmm.
biggest cautionary tale I have around this, though, is that, you know, we early on went in and ran a comprehensive survey across an organization. The leaders got the report and said, yeah, but like, that's just people's opinion, man. You
Yeah.
just grabbed that information from surveys. We have the data. Let's integrate all these systems together and build a dashboard so that we can have more up to the minute insights into what's
Hmm.
happening. And unfortunately, that organization spent about 2 years doing just that. They
Hmm.
set up some engineering capacity. They went off, they spent 2 years integrating all their systems together. At the end of those 2 years, they had a dashboard that, frankly, those leaders had virtually forgotten about the fact that they had requested that. Those weren't being used by the leaders, they weren't being used
Hmm.
by the teams. But now we knew with precision exactly how that team was performing. And unfortunately, it was about the same as it was 2 years previous when we ran the survey. No improvement was made over that
Yeah.
time. To me, that's the biggest loss.
Yeah. It's remarkable how hard it is to answer the question like, Nathen, how much time did you waste at work last week?
Right.
By looking at systems, or like how many times did Nathan have to wait for, you know, wait longer than whatever your comfortability threshold is? It's like there's so many things that go into that, like that create the developer experience that might not just be in in the tooling, where it's much faster if I just ask you. But of course, there's still, a lot of leaders are a little apprehensive to trust the qualitative data or self-reported data coming in through surveys, which, I understand, especially this discipline is one where we're taught to like, computers do what we tell them to do. It's like the code compiles or it doesn't. Or, there's just hesitancy, I think, sometimes to trust data. And actually, one of the arguments that I use is actually, well, the Dora metrics that you really prize because they are like the canon, surprise, they're actually collected through survey data, not through automated workflows. Again, doesn't mean that you can't collect them through automated workflows. And I know we want to disturb developers less. And so someone asked a question about survey fatigue, which is very much a real thing. The Dora survey is once a year, right, Nathan?
Yeah, so we
Um,
run our industry-wide survey once a year, and then
yeah,
we will occasionally go into organizations and as a service, kind of assess their team. And we always recommend that that happens annually. We typically get asked for it quarterly, and then we compromise on twice a year.
hmm. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Because that survey fatigue is real. And honestly, like between you and me, Laura, the real challenge with survey fatigue is if you keep asking me the same darn question over and over again, and I keep giving you the same answer and nothing changes,
Yeah,
that's what's fatiguing. If you
yeah,
ask me the same question and I see progress being made, that's certainly less fatiguing.
yeah. There has to be enough time in between surveys that someone can actually notice that something changed.
Yes,
Um, and it doesn't matter if you've done work, it matters if they notice. And I think that's the hard thing. That's the hard thing. I think often this is a nugget from John Cutler, who like describes technology companies. It's like a socio-technical
yes,
phenomenon that we have here, that like a lot of our training as engineering leaders is about computers, and we try to take those same patterns of like, well, I can just look at all the telemetry and I'm going to figure out where in my distributed system I have a node that's like going off, or like a memory leak or whatever. Um, but like people can actually talk to us, which is an asset here. And but also people are irrational and unpredictable. And so we have to consider that this is like a socio-technological system and not just purely this, the same way I would debug my distributed system.
absolutely. Also, you know, let's take something like your change lead time and let's just take a step in that process. I don't know, maybe it's change reviews, right? So you open up a pull request, you wait for someone else to do that code review. the system, like we can go pull from data, how long between pull request open and pull request merge, right? We can get very accurate data on that. We can
Hmm.
also go and ask people on the team. I think the most fascinating piece is when we do both and there's a discrepancy,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So like, all right, the data shows us that clearly on average, this is how long it takes. Laura, your experience is completely different. Let's dig into that. And in fact, if we don't ask the people on our team, Laura may have a very different experience to everyone else on the team. I don't know why
Hmm.
I'm picking on you, Laura. Maybe you have an amazing
It's
experience
fine.
and everyone else has a terrible experience.
I mean, this is ripped from my real life,
Yeah.
because this is like the conversation and the moment that really launched me down like developer productivity metrics. What?
Right.
Because I had worked on OpenStack and we had like change requests open in Garrett for like literally weeks at a time. And then I
Mhm.
was working at a company where we like maybe it was like a day or two to get like a PR reviewed. And I was like, this is amazing. And then one of the other developers was like, oh my God, this is so slow. I can't believe it's taking you all like like a whole day to review my
Right.
code. And I was like, what are you talking about? We were having wildly different experiences, but the data was still the same. And
Uh-huh.
then I was like, I wanted to be like, well, what does the data say? Like, and then it's us making the judgment as leaders. If we're like, well, what does the data say? It's only our experiences and we're totally ignoring what our team might be experiencing, which is just not the way. I mean, it's not the way to get change done and it's not the way to push the needle forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we are just in our last like 30 seconds. Nathen, those people here who are using Dora metrics or brand new to Dora metrics, is there one kind of tagline piece of advice of like what to do, and then what not to do in order to be successful with using these four key metrics in their org?
Yes, but you asked me to give one, and I don't know. I'll try to keep it to one. The first and most important thing you can do is go to Dora.community and join the community because I don't have all the answers. Laura, I don't
Despite
think
what I think.
I don't think you have all the answers either,
Oh,
Laura.
I
But
really
the
don't.
yeah, so
Yeah.
the best way actually is if we continue to collectively learn together. And so at Dora.community, you can do just that. You can share with other people who are on this journey that are going down this path and really trying to figure all of this out. And then part two,
Hmm.
remember that what Dora stands for is not DevOps research and assessment. I mean, that is what Dora stands for, but that's not what Dora stands for. What Dora stands for is get better at getting better. How do you embrace a mindset and a practice of continuous improvement? And so maybe set elite performance as that shining star. That's where we're headed. But the way that we're going to
Hmm.
get there is one step at a time and by getting better at getting better.
Totally. And also that elite cluster, it's a horizon that's always
Totally.
changing. I think continuous improvement is like it's about continuously improving. There's no final state. And so if you're using Dora metrics and you want to just like check off like, yep, we're elite, spend your time and money doing something else because that's not really the spirit of what these metrics are designed to do. Here to help you get better at getting better. I love that's just such a nice, concise way of putting it. So thank you
Awesome.
so much, Nathen.
Hey,
Thank
before
you
we
to your
go,
avocado shirt. Yeah,
before we
anything
go,
to
I,
share?
I do, I have one thing to share, but you have to, it's not really live yet. But I recently wrote an article on Dora.dev about the four key metrics. This
Ooh,
article is, it's available, but it's not linked anywhere yet. So this is my gift to all of you webinar participants. You can go read that article. I just dropped the link in the show notes. You can check it out there.
wonderful. What a nice, like, nice little tasty tidbit to leave us thinking.
What a gift. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathen. And thanks to all of you for investing in yourself and your team by showing up to listen to this. You're steps ahead of other leaders who didn't do that. Maybe they're watching the recording, which is great too. So pat yourself on the back for showing up for your teams in a great way. And we'll see you around the internet.
All right. Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.